Good morning and welcome again to the weekly joint Republican media availability with the House and Senate Republicans. I'm Kim Wirtz, Communications Director for the Senate Republicans, and I'm joined today by Senate Republican Leader John Braun from the 20th District, our newest member, Senator Simon Sefcik from the 42nd District, House Republican Leader J.T. Wilcox from the 2nd District, and House Republican Floor Leader Jacqueline Maycomber from the 7th District. And with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Braun for opening comments.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you everyone for being here this morning. It's a pleasure to be here. We in the Senate Republicans continue to focus on our priorities, the same priorities we had at the beginning of the session, which is restoring public safety, rebuilding affordability in the state of Washington for our families that are struggling, and also rebuilding trust in state government and frankly local government. This morning, I have a special privilege to introduce our newest state senator, Simon Sefcik, who is really off to a great start. This is his first caucus media availability. He's jumped right in after being appointed in the second week of session and been very involved in his district addressing the flooding they had recently, as well as sponsoring key legislation to help families in his district and around the state. So I'm going to give Simon a few minutes just to say hello, and then we'll go to the other members. Simon.
Thank you, Senator Braun, and thank you, everyone. Like Senator Braun mentioned, I am new to this role. Obviously, this is my first media availability, first session, but we've already hit the ground rolling, starting from kind of 0 to 100 miles per hour. So we've been working. My number one priority right now is providing flood relief up to farmers and all sorts of residents in Whatcom County that are in a lot of pain right now over the recent weather events and desperately need relief. So that's what has been occupying a lot of my time, in addition to several other bills that I've sponsored relating to the economy, relating to criminal justice and public safety, in order to improve the lives of the people of Whatcom County and the lives of Washingtonians all across the state. So that has been and will continue to be my focus.
All right, thank you, Simon. We'll go now to the Representative Wilcox.
Thanks very much, John, and thanks again to all of you for being here. It looks like we've had a lot greater press interest this year than we have in the past, and I appreciate it because I've said quite a few times in 2022 that the minority party in the minority caucuses has an important role to fill. We are here in part to keep the majority from making mistakes. And we're working on a lot of things this year that are the result of majority mistakes. We talked about long-term health care last week, and I appreciate the coverage that and the attention that you all drew to that. It's over in the Senate now. And this week, I've got a different priority. We're getting close to a policy cutoff next Thursday. Any policy bill that doesn't go through its policy committee is theoretically dead. And we have some very critical fix bills that are necessary in the arena of public safety. I've been saying since the very first press availability last year that when it comes to police and public safety reform, our job is to preserve the tools that are necessary for the police to keep us all safe, and at the same time, make it as unlikely as possible that those can be misused. I've asked Representative Jacqueline Maycomber to come in and talk about these bills. We are supporting Republican and Democrat bills at this point, and it's absolutely critical that we get these passed before the policy cutoff kills those bills. You may or may not know that Jacqueline has a background in law enforcement, like many of our members, current and past, and brings unique expertise to this arena. So that's why I've asked her to be part of our event today. Jacqueline?
Thank you. I appreciate being here. Just like you mentioned, we House Republicans have a priority for these police reform fixes. And frankly, so does the state of Washington. You've seen on the news recently on some of your own channels that people are watching their cars drive away. and they're being told there's nothing they can do. So we have policies to fix these issues that frankly, were broken last year during legislation. And so 1788, Representative Robertson, who's a former law enforcement officer, could have fixed those issues and had been able to continue vehicular pursuits. This is very important when crimes are being committed. People are just walking away. We have retail theft bills that really talk about the civility of our small businesses and making sure that they're able to continue. We got to make sure that, and that bill is 1656, Representative Griffey's bill. It's so important that we actually look at these fixes, and it's a priority for House Republicans. And just as the good leader mentioned, the clock is ticking. And there were promises made by the Democrat Party that these fixes would have occurred in public safety. And we have concerns that we did get Jesse Johnson's bill for civil use of force, which is really important. You know, our EMTs, our first responders, mental health crises, sometimes hands-on are used to save people's lives. And that bill is 1735, and that passed out of committee. It's important that we continue to support this. Unfortunately, we haven't looked at the criminal side of use of force. So someone could be committing a crime and walk away. These policies are very important. We have 2 Goodman bills that are dropped, and we need to look at those, making sure that they pass, you know, as a priority for the House Republicans, but as a priority for the state of Washington and our communities and, frankly, our families, that we can continue.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Great. Well, we'll go to questions then, and we will start first with Matt Markovich. Go ahead, Matt, and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I just want to just kind of get a testing the waters here, where things sit with HB 1735 and 1719, you know, the basically non-lethal weapons bill, as well as the changes, both of the Goodman bills there. So what's going on behind the scenes with those? I mean, those are top priorities for both sides, sounds like. Just want to get an update.
Well, I will lean to the good chair of the committee and the ranking member, Gina Moskrucker. We need to have something done. Like you've mentioned, we need to have those policies pass for the safety of our communities. And my understanding is there's a new Goodman bill, a 2000, that will be heard later. My understanding is maybe today or this week. And the clock is ticking to get those out of committee and passed for the safety of the community. If we can civilly take care of use of force, and as in Jesse Johnson's policy, then we should be able to take care of it when someone is committing a crime. These policies need to be passed.
So just to clarify, 1735 passed. We support that bill, but that's on the civil side. It's harder, I think, for Democrats to talk about, you know, in what ways and in what cases can you detain people that are suspected of criminal offenses. Republicans are here to help pass those. I think Goodman dropped kind of a substitute bill with a new bill number. It was a difficult hearing. We just want to be sure that people know the average family in Washington wants to have safety, and they also want to be sure that people have all the protections of our Constitution. This doesn't have to be a partisan thing. Republicans and Democrats want to clarify use of force.
Matt, did you have a follow-up question?
No, I forgot about 1735, but no, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And next we'll go to Laurel Demkovich from the spokesman.
Thanks, Kim. This is probably for folks in the House, but anyone in the Senate who is able to comment would be great too. I'm just wondering your thoughts on the safe staffing standard bill for hospitals that would kind of give these staffing ratios to possibly help with staffing shortages we're experiencing right now. I know Representative Wirtz is co-sponsoring the bill in the House, but I'm wondering just kind of how you all feel and if you have any idea of what the appetite is for that in your caucus.
Yeah, I think Representative Wirtz has a number of healthcare constituents, and he's concerned about conditions in hospitals, as we all are. I, a number of times, have gone out of my way to express gratitude to the people that have been there to keep us safe under very difficult conditions. And I think a lot of my colleagues are very concerned that this bill, though, may actually make it harder to have the beds available that are necessary. It adds some rigidity to how staffing works. The real problem is we have a shortage of nurses and other health professionals. And in order to address that, we need to, both fund and demand that our higher ed institutions turn out more healthcare professionals and not limit the amount of output that we can get from the ones that we have in our hospitals right now. I think there are a lot of things that can be negotiated. This is a unionized workforce. They're used to negotiating. And I think a lot of us would feel that this is the time to allow as much flexibility as possible for our hospitals.
Yeah, I would jump in on this bill. This bill does have a companion in the Senate, it's 5751, and this is really a very problematic bill. It appears to be almost punitive to our hospitals after 2 years of crisis. And I'm not arguing that the hospitals have been perfect, but they've been a key part of our response to the pandemic, a very important part of the response to the pandemic. We do have a nursing shortage, but let's be clear about this bill. The ratios, the idea that's set up here with staffing ratios, very similar to what's already in place in California. And California has the largest staff shortage in the country as a result of that bill. So nothing about this bill is going to fix the underlying problem, which is to make sure that our hospitals are properly staffed with well-trained nurses. We need to work on supply. We need to work on retention. And the other thing I would say is this is going to add significant costs. We've talked before about the cost of living in Washington. Imagine adding 25% more nurses to each hospital in the state. Two things are likely to happen. One is, in many of the areas that Republicans represent, the smaller hospitals are going to be financially unsustainable. They will not be able to survive, and think about what that does to our critical hospitals around the state. And two, to try to fill this demand for additional nurses to meet these ratios, hospitals are going to compete with our long-term care providers. That means, whether you're an adult family home or you're assisted living or a nursing home, you're now in an even tougher fight to find the staffing you need to serve your patients around the state of Washington. So nothing about this bill fixes the problem in front of us, which is a shortage of nurses. We should be focused, like Representative Wilcox says, on how do we attract and train more nurses to enter the field, not put this additional punitive measure on our hospitals when they're already, frankly, struggling after 2 years of a pandemic.
Laurel, did you have a follow-up?
I'm okay for now. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. And next we'll go to Joe Pogela from, I think it's, you'll have to remind me, Jeff, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me.
From Como Radio.
My apologies.
Yeah,
sorry.
that's fine. My question is about House Bill 1807. This is Walsh's bill, and as I understand it, it effectively bans the teaching of critical race theory and other things in Washington state. What is the caucus's thoughts on that? Is this something that the Republicans are going to back as a whole and put their weight behind?
Well, I think based on last year, we will not see that get a hearing, and no one will have an opportunity to vote on that probably. But if you go back and look at the debate from last year, I think you'll find that Walsh and others are very concerned that we are able to teach history, and we're able to teach history from all perspectives. And I think every Republican that I know wants to teach the history of our country, teach the history of racism, teach the good things and the bad things that we do and have done in the past. What we don't want is to have that prescribed in a way that is divisive. And we'd like to, I think, you probably know I'm a history major. So I feel pretty strongly about academic freedom and the ability to teach accurate history. And, Walsh's effort has probably been painted as something that is limiting, but he's actually trying to prevent something that is limiting.
I would just add, and we don't have this bill in the Senate, of course. We have a couple other bills I think take a slightly different approach. We have a bill from Senator Short that would basically empower local school boards to have more flexibility when it comes to curriculum in their school districts, help school districts reflect their communities. I think that's the right thing. And then Senator Dozier has a parental bill of rights that again gets after the engaging and involving parents in the education system in a productive and positive way. I think this is part of one of the things I mentioned earlier. How do we rebuild trust? After 2 years of pandemic where many parents are very frustrated, their children were kept out of school, they have enormous learning loss, they want the best for their children like any parent, but they're frustrated and unsure how to get there. I think a better way to approach this is let's empower local school boards to get the job done, to recover this learning loss, and let's engage parents in a way that involves them in their children's education. That's good for them, the children, frankly, for the school districts, and therefore ultimately good for our state.
Jeff, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just briefly, I would say on a broader perspective, not specifically on this bill, the legislature would set curriculum and what the students need to learn and requirements for graduation, all that. But is this kind of getting too nitty gritty? Setting lesson plans, banning certain lesson plans, really kind of dictating to teachers when most lawmakers aren't professional educators. I guess that's sort of the broader question of how detailed is the legislature really supposed to get here?
Well, I think you're putting your finger on a very broad concern that we've got school boards. People put a great deal of effort into running and then serving in those. And time and time again, especially over the last couple of years, you've found them frustrated because either the legislature or the governor is deciding how they can hire, who they have to fire, what they're teaching. Without any real regard for how some rural school district might be different from Seattle. And to be honest, most of this legislation comes from legislators who just represent Seattle. And I think Seattle should be able to teach what Seattle wants. I also think that the rest of the state should be able to establish their own policies and teach the things that fit the values of their communities.
Yeah, just to add on that, this curriculum directed by the state legislature is really fracturing our schools around the state. It's bad for school districts, bad for parents, bad for students, frankly, bad for anybody involved in K-12 public education in our state.
I guess by that statement, it sounds like you would be opposed to banning or mandating any particular lesson being taught.
I think what Senator Walsh's bill is actually trying to back up on statewide curriculum put in place by the majority in the last couple of years. So I think you're reading it wrong. I think it's trying to back up from this state directed curriculum we've seen over the last couple of years.
Thank you,
Jeff. We've supported lots of things that I think create greater diversity in what kids learn. I think you saw a few years ago, me and most Republicans support components of Native American history in Washington state. And what I really liked about that bill is it invited our local tribes to be part of that curriculum development. So rather than something that came from Olympia, we have a number of tribes spread around our state. They were part of helping to develop that curriculum with local schools and with local school boards. That's a pretty good example of how to do it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Next, we will go to Austin Jenkins from Northwest News Network.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to ask about some of the voting related bills that are getting hearings. I think the context is you're getting a lot of bill specific questions because it's still early in the session and a lot of hearings are going on. Maybe we'll get more philosophical later on in the session, but there's specifically a proposal in the Senate to expand the State Voting Rights Act. And there's also a proposal to expand, but also it looks like strengthen the state's motor voter system, and to try to, at the same time, as expand it, also perhaps make it more secure. And I'm just wondering if anybody on the panel has had a chance to look at these, has any opinions about the direction that the majority party seems to be headed on these two fronts.
Well, I will jump in there a little bit. I am not deeply familiar with the expansion of the Voting Rights Act that's proposed. I know it exists, and I have some concerns. I mean, let's be clear. We've just recently enacted the Washington State Voting Rights Act. It is not fully implemented. It seems a little bit early to me to come back in, and as I understand that shrinks the windows for the review of a complaint. It basically just tightens everything up before we've ever even seen if the underlying bill works. So without knowing the bill a lot, I can't talk a lot about the specifics, but if all it is tightening up the current law without ever allowing the current law to get into place and see what it does, it seems premature to me.
Great answer, John.
Austin, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just briefly, let me ask you about, so regarding the automatic voter registration, this is it's a different bill, also in the Senate. It would expand motor voter, essentially, it looks like, to other arenas like the health benefit exchange when you buy health insurance. But at the same time, it sounds like it would require Department of Licensing to develop a system to determine whether each applicant presents sufficient information to complete a voter registration. So it's an opt-out rather than an opt-in model. But kind of concurrent with this, it sounds like efforts would be made to make the system perhaps more secure. How does that one land with you all?
Well, again, I'm not deeply familiar with the bill. It is early in the session, but I think, I mean, not surprisingly, efforts to get folks registered to vote broadly, I support those. But we need to do it in a way that we ensure, folks are authorized to vote. And this, what you described seems like, we might be getting ahead of ourselves here. We should do this in a careful, cautious way. And I say that because we have, unfortunately, folks on both sides of the aisle, locally and nationally, in different circumstances, calling into question our election system. I believe in our election system. I don't agree with every law that's on the books regarding to our election system, but I do think our election system is run in accordance with past law, and we shouldn't undermine the credibility by calling into question. I just think adding more things like this without very carefully thinking through it, adds questions on both sides of the aisle. That's good for no one. That doesn't help us in Washington State or nationally.
Okay, thanks, Austin. And then we will go to Joe O'Sullivan with the Seattle Times. Joe, are you with us? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We can.
All right, question for the leaders. Please ignore the phone in the back. Senate Bill 5909, Senator Emily Randall's emergency power bill. I'm curious to hear from the leaders what your thoughts on that and how it would let you exercise your powers, and if that's sufficient to address your concerns on emergency powers.
I guess since it's a Senate bill, I'll jump in on that one too. So kind of two things. One, after nearly 2 years, it is nice to see the Democrats entering the discussion on emergency powers, acknowledging that we've learned some things over the last 2 years, that this emergency is not like previous emergencies that were envisioned under, when the current statute was created, and we need to adjust. So that's, in my view, good news. The bad news is the actual bill itself does very little to change our current circumstance and does very little to re-engage the legislature in weighing in on the proclamations that the governor has issued over the course of the pandemic. So good and bad. I'm glad they're finally entering the conversation after 2 years of deferring to the governor. And not super impressed with the proposal, but happy to have a good faith discussion about where we could get to make our law better with regard to emergency powers.
Yeah, I believe the last week we've seen 2 deep blue states make some major changes. In New York, the mask mandate was found to be unconstitutional. And in Connecticut, I believe that they're ending the state of emergency or major elements of it. And that's a voluntary action of, I think, the state legislature in deep blue Connecticut. So Washington is far, far behind even other blue states. I'm glad to see Democrats taking action on this. There's a few detailed areas that I'd like to make more progress, and we've shared some ideas about this. First of all, I think to require unanimous consent to end a state of emergency, that Democrats generally like things that are simple majority rather than super majorities. And it seems like we ought to be able to do it with 3 out of 4 in this case. And there, as we've discussed this, it's become apparent there's some reasons where for federal funding issues, for example, you might want to maintain a state of emergency, but you would want to have some legislative control of the individual mandates. And so we'd like to see something with more flexibility there. And we've got, about 10 days now to work on improving these bills. And I'm certainly not giving up hope that we can make major progress.
Joe, did you have a follow-up question?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, great. I think that's all our questions. I will turn it back over to Senator Braun.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure talking to you. Just a reminder, if you didn't already, the Senate's going to be on the floor Wednesday and Friday. On Friday, I mentioned that we will be doing a resolution honoring former Senator Doug Erickson and his family. They'll be down here. So I look forward to that. And beyond that, we'll continue to focus on reducing the cost of living here in Washington, improving public safety, and as I said, rebuilding trust in state and local government. Thank you.